Well, I'm going to kick it off here. Good afternoon and welcome to the USTA Midwest Collegiate Committee's final segment in our month of May collegiate webinar series. My name is Tim Corwin, current chair of the USTA Midwest Collegiate Committee and general manager at Western Racquet Club in Elm Grove, Wisconsin. I hope everyone joining the webinar is doing well, is healthy, and is excited to get back on the tennis court. Throughout the webinar, if you have questions for the panelists, please use the chat window. In the event that we don't get to your question, we'll post an FAQ afterwards. We'll also post the recording of this webinar on the USTA Midwest section website. Today, we are talking about all things NCAA, in particular, student athlete eligibility, academic and membership affairs, and championships. We are joined this afternoon with three NCAA leading experts. We welcome Lauren McManigal, Coordinator for Academic Review in the NCAA Eligibility Center. Lauren is a graduate of Emory University, where she earned her degree in English and was also a member of the women's tennis team. And we have a national singles champion on the panel today. So she won the NCAA singles championship. Lauren also earned her law degree from the University of North Carolina School of Law. We also welcome Sarah Hubbard, the Assistant Director of Academic and Membership Affairs. Sarah processes interpretation and waiver requests pertaining to amateurism, financial aid and awards, and benefits. Sarah previously worked in compliance at the University of Georgia, as well as the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Sarah is a graduate of Pfeiffer University in North Carolina with a sports management degree, and she was a member of the women's lacrosse team. Joining Lauren and Sarah on the panel is John Buckner, Associate Director for Championships and Alliances. John works with both the women's and men's tennis championships, in addition to several other sports championships. John's undergraduate work was at John Carroll University, and he received his master's degree from The Ohio State University. Prior to his time at the NCAA, John worked in event management at Ohio State and in facilities at Washington University in St. Louis. So welcome, guys. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank the panelists. Before we dive into the subject matter, I wanted to start with John and just kind of get to know our three panelists just a bit. How has the Safer at Home impacted your personal life? Any positives, new habits that you have that maybe you wouldn't have had the time to dive into if you were working in a regular, work-life situation?
Yeah, I mean, this experience that we're in right now, the quarantine from March 14th until now, is usually the busiest time of the year for me in working with championships. So to be at home during that time was definitely life-altering for me. We would have just finished a tennis championship last weekend if we would have had it. So that was, a moment for me. But, since that time, I really only left my house to go to Chipotle, the grocery store, and the Lowe's. Good people at Chipotle, so shout out to them. But I haven't seen my coworkers and my family in person outside of, these Zoom calls or Teams calls and stuff like that. So it's been a challenge. It's been different. But in the light of challenges, you got to take an opportunity to make some good changes. And I think I've tried to do that. So in the quarantine, I've, committed to working out. You can see a pull-up bar behind me. So I've been working on that, working on bumping up. But I've also done, tomorrow I'm about to finish a month of Insanity. So I'm pretty pumped about that.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Wow, nice.
And, yeah, so it's been good. And then, from a work perspective, we're just really trying to work on some projects to help get better, improve our efficiency. Oftentimes in these times when you always say, well, I don't have time to do that, and you put it on the back burner, you have time to do that stuff now, and it's time to take those things on, and hopefully they're going to make us better at the end of the day. So
nice.
We're excited about those things, and hopefully they'll make us better when we get back at it.
The important but not urgent things can get moved into the urgent quadrant. Very good. Thank you, John. Sarah, how about you? How has life been for you these last 10 to 12 weeks?
Yeah, I was just joking with someone in the membership today about how I think compliance folks need a raise after this past few months. It has been super busy. Usually we are, June, July is entering our busy time in AMA, just with the previous academic year ending and the new academic year rolling into there. But with COVID, we have had a number of, rule adjustments and just circumstance adjustments, just like everyone, that we've had to adapt to, which have created more questions and more work, which I think everyone in the NCAA and the membership have taken with stride. So that has been busy. I think starting our busy season earlier, but job security, right? But on a personal level, I might be one of the only people that I'm okay with quarantine for continuing on. I picked up and left Indy and headed out to my parents when it first started. So I'm in Denver now, and I've probably gotten more one-on-one time with my parents and my sisters than I've had since probably college, like summer break college. So that's been nice, and just enjoying being in the same state and city and household now with them. So I might not be saying that in a couple months, or they might not be saying that, but it's been good.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Sarah. That's really great. So more time with family. Awesome. Lauren, tell me about you. Tell the viewers how the last 10 weeks have been for you.
Sure. So I want to start out by just saying that I hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. My thoughts are with anyone and everyone that's been impacted by the pandemic. We're all getting through this together, and hopefully everything gets a little bit better each day. But to share a little bit about myself and add a little positive note during a difficult time, my husband and I actually got married during the pandemic. So our wedding was originally scheduled for March 21st, which was pretty much the first weekend that everything in the US started shutting down. The CDC came out with their guidelines allowing no more than 10 people at social gatherings. And the next day we found out that our chapel and reception venue were closing. So we pretty much just let all our guests know that it was canceled. And we actually called our parents and siblings to see if they could get to North Carolina for a ceremony the next day. We hopped in the car, drove 10 hours from Indy to North Carolina, and got married 24 hours later with just immediate family. So it was
congratulations.
Thank you.
You'll never forget this time.
Yeah,
sure.
It was quite the whirlwind. We're both super happy though, and just kind of living an extended quarantine honeymoon, but learning to working from home. We got a puppy a month ago, so pretty much just adding to the adventure along the way. But I think
start. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one thing I've learned in my personal life as well as work since the pandemic is just how to be more fluid. I've been super impressed with the NCAA and especially the Eligibility Center kind of reacting to new developments on a day-by-day basis and serving our member institutions and the student athletes with always keeping their best interests in mind. So it's been really nice to see that.
Very cool. Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, guys. So Lauren, let's jump into the theme for today. Can you walk us through the NCAA initial eligibility requirements for the 3 divisions, and what adjustments, if any, have been made due to COVID-19?
Absolutely, that sounds good. I'm going to start with Division 3. So to be eligible to represent a D3 school in athletics competition, a student athlete must be in good academic standing, which is determined by each college or university itself rather than through NCAA legislation. So this means that the NCAA Eligibility Center does not perform certifications for D3 college-bound student athletes. Therefore, if you're hoping to play tennis at a D3 school, make sure you reach out to the coach and ask what the admissions requirements are for that school. I'm sure most institutions have had to make some adjustments due to COVID-19, so you'll want to be aware of those changes as well. Just try to find out all the information you can and kind of proceed from there. And then unlike Division 3, Divisions 1 and 2 have NCAA legislative requirements for initial eligibility. So I'm just going to give a brief overview, as I want to leave plenty of time for my colleagues to speak with you as well, but hopefully I can give you a nice broad understanding as well as touch on some recent changes made in response to COVID-19. But starting with Division 1, there are 3 academic outcomes for a student's final certification, those being qualifier, academic redshirt, and non-qualifier. And a qualifier is eligible to receive athletics aid, practice, and compete in the first year. An academic redshirt is eligible to receive athletics aid in the first year and practice in the first term, but they cannot compete in their first year. And a non-qualifier is not eligible to receive athletics aid, practice, or compete in their first year. I'm going to go over the requirements for each of these, and then we'll move on to Division 2. So, to be a qualifier in D1, a student athlete must graduate from high school on time. They must complete 16 NCAA approved core courses in the correct subject distribution. This includes having 10 of those 16 courses being completed before their 7th semester, and 7 of those must be in English, math, or science. The students must earn a minimum core course GPA of a 2.3 and earn a combined SAT or ACT sum score that matches their core course GPA on the Division I sliding scale. And then to be deemed an academic redshirt, a student athlete must have 16 core courses, earn a minimum GPA of 2.0, and a combined test score that matches their GPA on the D1 sliding scale. In D1, if a student does not meet the qualifier academic redshirt requirements, they're considered a non-qualifier. And then similar to D1 in Division 2, there are also 3 academic outcomes for a student's final certification: qualifier again, and then a partial qualifier and non-qualifier. They're pretty similar, but have slightly different requirements. So in D2, to be a qualifier, which again means they can receive athletics aid, practice, and compete in their first year, a student must graduate high school, complete 16 NCAA approved core courses with the correct subject distribution, earn a minimum of a core course GPA of a 2.2, and a combined test score that matches their GPA on the D2 full qualifier sliding scale. To be deemed a D2 partial qualifier, which is very similar to the D1 academic redshirt, meaning they can receive athletics aid and practice in the first year, a student must have 16 core courses in the correct subjects, have a minimum core course GPA of a 2.0, and combined test score that matches their GPA on the D2 partial qualifier sliding scale. So just like in D1, in Division 2, if neither of those standards are met, a student will be a non-qualifier. And again, that means that they're not eligible to receive athletics aid, practice, or compete in the first year. So that's just an overview of the legislative standards for D1 and D2. I know that's a ton of information. Thanks for getting through it with me, but we have really great resources that are available to review, which will help understand any of the little details as well. And now I'll just take a little bit of time to talk about the adjustments that we've made this year, given the unprecedented events during the spring and summer of 2020. Yep.
If I interrupt you, just keep your train of thought. We have a question from the Q&A that might be like relate to what you just covered.
Okay.
And the question is, given the COVID impact on school schedule and curriculum coverage, if a student were to repeat their high school year, will that impact NCAA qualification?
In terms of, could you repeat that real quick?
Yeah, if a student were to repeat their high school year, so maybe they, I don't know, didn't have a computer and couldn't do online school the last 2 months and they had to repeat a school year, will that impact NCAA qualification? Will they be, how would that impact? Would that take a year of eligibility away if they had to graduate a year later?
So in Division 1, that would impact it because, and I'll get to the COVID-19 specific stuff right after this, but it's kind of all built into what the automatic waiver entails. So maybe I'll run through that quick and hopefully it'll clear up the question a little bit more, and then we can return back if I need to clarify anything else. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, cool. So we have partnered with the membership to identify some adjustments for the initial eligibility certification process due to COVID-19. So the first of these adjustments is actually the COVID-19 automatic waiver, and students with an expected spring or summer 2020 graduation date who initially enrolled full-time in 2020-21 will be academically eligible to receive athletics aid, practice, and compete in the first year of full-time enrollment if they meet the following criteria. So they must complete 10 core units prior to the start of their 7th semester and present a 2.3 core course GPA for Division I and a 2.2 core course GPA for Division II. So as you can tell, the main difference here is the number of core courses that are required, which is typically 16, but only 10 for COVID auto waiver, and there's no SAT or ACT required. That's the main criteria, but there are also a few other adjustments that
You just nailed a question
yeah.
from Lisa. Yeah, you see that? The question to the panelists from Lisa Stone.
Did she write that out?
Yeah.
Awesome.
If she asked, but with some schools not requiring SAT or ACT, does NCAA still require those tests?
Perfect.
Yeah. Are there any slides that you're looking at that you think would be relevant while you're sharing this, or even like a website? I think you might have. If you think you have something on your screen that would be.
I don't have them right now, but I could give them to you after this so people could refer back to it on your website if that would be helpful.
Sure. Or is there a spot on the NCAA website that you could direct them to that might be?
Yes, there is an FAQ. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick.
I don't mean to derail us. You were like,
No problem.
you were smashing it, and
It is a lot of information.
yeah, no, I really like that auto waiver criteria. That's super helpful. Like while you're looking that up, how long will that auto waiver criteria, like, will that be the new standard moving forward, or is that just temporary?
Sure. So this is just a temporary standard. We've worked really hard with research and D1 and D2 memberships to create it, and the temporary adjustments were made in this current unprecedented situation. However, moving forward, we expect to move back to our legislative standard. Therefore, current juniors, sophomores, and freshmen should really work towards achieving that those standards that I talked about at the beginning. As we have been along the way, though, we will continue to monitor the situation and act accordingly. Let's see.
Do you guys know Glenn Terry?
Yeah.
Okay. He's helping you out.
Oh, thanks, Glenn.
That's awesome. All right. Well, you can keep going. Yeah.
Okay, let's see. So yeah, the other adjustments that the EC has made, the first being the legislation requires official records during the certification process, and these should still be submitted if possible. However, given the unique circumstances, if unofficial records are available for students with an expected spring or summer 2020 grad date, we will accept those unofficial records during this time as well. And then similarly, proof of graduation is a legislative requirement. However, it's not a requirement for the COVID-19 auto waiver. But again, we're still encouraging all students to submit a final high school transcript when they can. And then finally, due to the COVID-19, some districts and schools have decided to go pass-fail for their courses this semester, and for NCAA approved core courses completed in the spring or summer 2020 that have been issued a passing grade, we will apply the credit earned in these courses towards the core course requirement and certification. And a passing grade will be assigned a value of a 2.3 only if it is helpful to the student's core course GPA. So if it would actually be harmful to the student's GPA, it won't be calculated in, but the units earned will still be used towards the core requirements for the student. And this point is especially important to note for younger students as well, because we will apply this pass-fail policy to students from every grade level. So freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, this will apply to any pass-fail courses you took during this time as well in the spring or summer of 2020. And the COVID-19 auto waiver will be applied for all 2020 graduates again who initially enroll full-time in 2020-21, and we will attempt to certify under the legislative standard that applies, and if we can't certify them under those, we'll look to certify them under the COVID auto waiver. So it's just pretty much how it'll be applied there.
Thank you. Is there a deadline for when students can submit their transcripts for the COVID-19 auto waiver? Maybe I missed it, you mentioned it.
Nope, there's not. So we'll apply the auto waiver criteria at any account evaluation upon receiving a transcript. So there's no specific date or deadline to get those in. However, we suggest you submit as quickly as you can and as soon as possible.
Awesome. And final question, what if a student athlete doesn't meet the COVID-19 auto waiver criteria or the legislative requirements?
So if a student athlete doesn't meet the COVID-19 auto waiver criteria, the student should continue to work towards meeting the legislated Division 1 and 2 initial eligibility requirements and submit all of their transcripts, test scores, and proof of graduation to the Eligibility Center. If you don't meet the legislative requirements either, we would suggest trying to take additional courses over the summer, as well as work with your athletics compliance office at your NCAA school regarding next steps.
Nice. Awesome. Outstanding, Lauren. Thank you so much. A lot of information. I think those websites that Glenn put up or those landing spots, the PDFs, I'm sure would be super helpful. Appreciate it. Maybe there'll be more questions coming up. I'm going to turn it over to upper left corner. Sarah, I don't know what it looks like on your computer, but you're in my upper left. Let's talk about the legislative process for the 3 divisions. Who are the key stakeholders, and specifically who is responsible for tennis-specific legislation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I might be biased, but I think legislation is extremely important. I think we, especially now in today's climate of the media, we're seeing it more often and what rules are being made or discussed, especially on the Division I level. Key stakeholders for all 3 division are, number one, going to be, the membership, the institutions, the conferences. All, both of those entities have avenues to propose concepts that can eventually turn into legislation or proposals in Division 2 and 3. So they really control a lot of the legislative power. Student athletes are a key stakeholder as well. We at the NCAA definitely stress the importance of the student athlete voice. We have student athlete advisory committees on every campus. And then we also trickle up to our conference level SACs and then national SACs, who do represent all student athletes on Division 1, 2, and 3 at the national level, where they will have a voice to provide feedback on legislative proposals that impact student athlete well-being. We also have stakeholders in our outside affiliate groups. So the biggest one being coaches associations. So we look to the coaches associations, among other entities, for feedback. However, they can't propose legislation. They definitely can influence outcomes, influence potential proposals, in the sense that they can write to our standing committees or go through the conference process to recommend legislation. The standing committees and conferences are the ultimate ones who sponsor it, but they do have those avenues to help, get their voice heard. And especially in a sport-specific scenario such as tennis, we really see that as the avenue. For Division I, utilizing the Student Athlete Experience Committee, we see coaches associations right to that group regarding legislation. Big one being recruiting calendars, for example, in some of our sports or sport-specific legislation. If the standing committee process doesn't work, the conference avenue is always an option as well, which we do see as well. Not as common, but it's definitely there.
Can I interrupt for a second? So
Yeah.
just like the legislative process, like on the first webinar we had, they extended the dead period to June 15th. Is that like your bailiwick?
So I would say in this unique situation, it's not going the traditional route. We are seeing the council and also our council coordination committee for the Division I levels. They're making those assessments on the dead period. However, yes, if there were a dead period, for example, I think wrestling this year does have an outstanding proposal that is dealing with dead periods, that would come through the legislative committee and my team at the Ncaa, and we work with either the conference or the standing committee to get that into proposal format.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
I might have cut you off
No, you're
in the
good.
middle of that question. How has COVID-19 impacted the legislative process in general?
Yeah, it has definitely impacted it. I would say for the current cycle, the 2019-20 legislative cycle, Division I has probably been impacted the most, only because Division II and Division III vote on their legislation at the January Ncaa convention. So that has already happened for this year. So they were able to get those proposals voted on and taken care of, where the Division I process is a little more extended in terms of when votes occur. So typically, Division I does vote on some proposals in January. Those typically are non-controversial or proposals that need an immediate vote for whether it's a student athlete well-being issue or a time commitment issue. So we usually vote on those, a smaller pool of those in January. The majority of our vote does take place in April. So as I'm sure you've been tracking, we didn't vote on all but 4 proposals at this time. And that process was really the legislative committee making the recommendation to council that, hey, our institutions are facing critical issues and time-sensitive issues on campus that don't really, and legislation is on the back of their mind. So do we really need to pipe that in, vote on those where we got other pressing matters to worry about? So that was number one. The other thing is, I think the legislative cycle is going to look different this year. Frankly, D2 and D3, as of now, are planning to continue their normal process and hasn't necessarily been affected like Division I. And I'll say that's only really because historically they don't have as many proposals. Might be less than 10, just a handful each year, where Division I, we can have hundreds. And well, not hundreds, but up to 100. You know, we've got a ton of proposals that get into the cycle or get into the legislative cycle. So this year, council has come out with a limited moratorium and really limiting the scope of what can be introduced and proposed this year. So we're going to be seeing things that are more COVID related that might need an immediate attention to because of COVID related issues, but also topics that we're seeing in the news, the transfer space, the NLI space, proposals that are essential to the operation of Division I and their strategic plan. So it's going to be a smaller pool this year, but we'll still have some proposals coming down the pipeline for sure.
Can I ask you a specific question about the decision to allow an extra year of eligibility? So would that have come through the legislative process, or was that a unilateral decision by presidents, or how did that come about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So that did not come through the normal legislative process. I think the biggest reason being, this might not be the necessarily right term, but I'm going to say emergency legislation in a way, due to the fact that schools had to make decisions on what to do with their spring sports, for example, and what that was going to look like for the next year. Also student athletes and determining whether they were going to come back or stay. That was really expedited and went through our council. So they looked at that. So it did not go through the full year process, like obviously because of the timing.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Last question, actually, it's kind of a twofold question. Any misconceptions about the legislative process? And then where would we find resources for the process?
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that the NCAA makes the rules. It is all membership driven. Unfortunately, sometimes I would like to vote on some of those proposals, but we don't have that authority. We are just there to assist with interpreting the rules, drafting of the proposals, but really it is coming from membership driven. They are the only ones that get the vote, and staff really has nothing to do with it on that scope. But we are behind the scenes helping the process along.
Sure.
And then I will share my screen. Let me see. All right, I will share my screen and show one of our legislative websites is Legislative Actions and Issues. If you go through ncaa.org through the governance tab at the top, legislative actions and issues, this will give you a snapshot and announcements for Division 1, 2, and 3. This page is open to the public, where some of our other announcements through some of our membership software databases you might not see. We post a lot of informational educational tools on this platform, and so I would just say it does a breakdown of our legislative cycles and various updates that come through based off legislation and proposals coming through the system. So I would say this is the biggest tool for folks to keep up to date.
Awesome. Very helpful. Thank you. So that ncaa.org/governance.
Yep. And legislative actions and issues page. Okay.
Outstanding. Sarah, very good. Really, really thorough. Thank you for sharing that. This is kind of a trifecta. So it's all what happens before college with Lauren, Sarah, the process, legislation, how the sport is actually, how it plays out during the 4 years or more. And John, you get to bring up the rear with what everybody hopes to compete in as a student athlete, making the NCAA championships, kind of that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Tell us about the championship formats, and they're unique for each division.
Yeah, well, thanks, Timon. So the NCAA championships, like you said, are the pinnacle of the career for our collegiate tennis players, and it's our goal as NCAA staff and with our committees to provide a memorable experience for our student athletes who are participating in those championships. You know, for each division has its own tennis championship committee made up of coaches and administrators from across the country. And my role is to support the committee's work and provide guidance to them with their work. Their work really is overseeing the championship from selection, and so we award a championship trophy at the end of the championship. That's my favorite job, is to help hand over that trophy. It's awesome. So they also help choose the final site each year where the championship takes place. So I also work with our host institutions to help plan for the championships each year and make sure they're meeting our expectations and they follow kind of our policies and procedures for the championship. Primarily, I work with Division I women's tennis alongside another colleague, Liz Susha, who works with men's tennis. And then Roberta Page works with Division II tennis for men and women. And then we have two other colleagues, Zach Christopher and Michaela Ledane, work with Division III men's and women's tennis. So they're the championship managers for each of the division's tennis championships. And then kind of like you said, each division has a little bit different of a championship format. So in Division I, well, Division I and III, they both have a team championship aspect and an individual championship aspect where they crown singles and doubles champions. Division II only has a team championship. In Division I, for the team championship, it's a 64-team bracket for both genders, with 8 teams advancing to the final site. Once the team championship concludes, then we take and start the individual championships. So the individual championships for Division I, we have a 64 singles player bracket for men and women. Each gender has 64 singles players, and then the same for the doubles. We have 32 doubles teams per gender that takes place as well at the same time. So if you're in both singles and you qualify in the singles and you qualify in the doubles, and maybe you also were in the team tournament, you could possibly be competing for up to 10 days or 10 days in a row, which is a lot. But awesome, and I've seen it happen, and these athletes are incredible, so it's fun to watch. In Division II, each gender has a 48-team bracket, and with 16 of those teams advancing to the final site. As I said, they do not have an individual portion to their championship. And then for Division III, the men's championship has a 44-team bracket, while the women's championship has a 49-team bracket. For both genders, 8 teams advance to the final site. After the team championship takes place, similar to Division I, they have an individual championship. In Division III, however, that has 32 singles players per gender, and then 16 doubles teams per gender.
Nice. John, how are sites selected?
Great question. So the NCAA operates on a 4-year bid cycle, meaning every 4 years we announce host sites for 4 years at a time across really the majority of our championships. There's a few that have kind of some long-term deals that are not a part of the process, but the majority of our championships we do 4 years at a time. So it's a big process, and it takes a lot of work, and we're actually in the middle of that right now. So we right now we are open for we were open for bids for host sites from 23, 24, 25, and 2026 championships. Bids were due in early February. And the tennis committees that I mentioned earlier for each division, they will meet this summer to review the bids and make their recommendations for those final sites. Their recommendations then proceed through our governance process up to the group that they report to. So in Division I, that group, the Division I tennis committees report to the Competition Oversight Committee. The Division II tennis committee reports to the Division II Championships Committee, and the Division III tennis committees report to the Division III Championships Committees, and those groups will kind of have the final approval for those final sites. We'll see those final sites announced if all goes well. We plan that to have that announcement kind of in mid-October. And then really the last thing I'll say is we do have sites from the last bid cycle out through the 2022 championship. So I'll just share where they're at for the next 2 years for people to know. So in Division I, the 2021 championships are at the USTA's national campus in Orlando. And in 2022, they'll be at the University of Illinois in Champaign. For Division II, the 2021 championships are in Surprise, Arizona. And in 2022, they will be in San Lando, Florida. And then for Division III, the 2021 championships are at Claremont McKenna Harvey Mudd Scripps College in Claremont, California. And in 2022, they will be at the USTA's national campus in Orlando, Florida. So
that's
the update.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you got to plan 4 years out, but that's super helpful for planning. That's great. I know that in conversation with Lauren the last couple months, that she advises the ITA or works closely with the ITA. I don't know in terms of the championships, if there's a lot of intersection between your work with the women's tennis championships and the ITA when you're on site. But I kind of a rule or a question about the rules, like who makes the playing rules for college tennis?
Well, I first just want to say we at the NCAA have a great relationship with the ITA and then our Intercollegiate Tennis Association. They're a wonderful group. We enjoy working with them and have a great working relationship with Tim Russell and his team there. So really enjoy working with them, and they're a great resource for us. They provide a great resource for us, not only with the data collection of all the score reporting and everything for Division I tennis, and help us provide that data for the selection process. So we really appreciate our great relationship with them. In terms of our championship overall, we do follow the rules. The ITA is a rule-making body for tennis, and so we do follow their rules. They make the playing rules. That's not the case necessarily for all of our different sports, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for tennis, college tennis, the ITA makes the rules. They have a rules committee, so we're not really involved in that process. However, the NCAA did recently create a tennis rules subcommittee that actually started this year, and it's made up of members from all three divisions championship tennis committees that I spoke about earlier. And really our goal is to help collaborate with the ITA on the playing rules for college tennis. So we'll see where that goes in the coming years. Our goal is not to take over that process from them by any means, but just to work together with them. To give an example for some other sports, though, like in football, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, to name a few, the NCAA is the group that writes the rule book for the sports. For those sports in particular. There's a couple others too. So there's a rules committee that, again, is made up of our coaches and administrators from across the country, and also represented from all three divisions that help make those rules. And then there's a couple other sports like field hockey, golf, gymnastics, tennis, fencing, where the NCAA competition follows another organization's rules. For the most part, and in general, oftentimes those are kind of international rules. So I work with men's gymnastics is another sport that I work with, and they follow the International Gymnastics Federation's rules. We do have the ability to modify those rules a little bit. We have a little document that's a couple pages long that has a couple modifications that our gymnastics committee does. But that's kind of, at least in terms of other sports and how we work with tennis, that's kind of how the rules work for the sport.
It's been a long time since I was a college coach, but I remember arriving on campus at the host site and sending the team out to compete, and the logo had to be a certain size. It had, or maybe no logo. And I don't know where that stands. I don't know if that was coming from the NCAA or the rules committee, but it's really interesting to kind of learn about, you know, who's setting the rules for each sport like that.
Yep. Yeah, and I saw Lisa ask the question. Yeah, the ITA, to clarify, the ITA does write the rules for college tennis.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Last question. And I know Sarah had shown her screen. Do you have just, can you share your screen of where viewers and folks would go to get championship information?
Yeah. And I will first kind of say we have two websites, which I know can somewhat be confusing for people. So I'll show you both and show you what the purpose of each one is really. But I'll be brief about it because it's not too in depth. But so let me see here. All right, I think you should be able to see it now. So we have the ncaa.com, and then we have ncaa.org. And so the ncaa.com website is really our championship-centered, results, fan-centric focused website, if I will. I'm sure our social and digital team will love how I'm explaining it. But ncaa.com is really where, if we're in our championship, that's where you want to go and find the results of the championship. You can follow along with our brackets. There's live video links, and there's on here as well as some links to live stats. So I'll just go to the tennis championship page. So we start at sports, and we find tennis here, men and women. So I'm going to click on women because that's the one I work with. And then there's a tab here for each division as well, a drop down that you can pick which division that you want to check. So if you were to click the men's tennis one, same thing exists. Click the division that you want to see. So I'm going to stick with Division 1 just because, again, I work with that group. So you can see we can click the bracket, and we can see the bracket from last year is on here. And that gets updated in real time. If we were in the championship, I could click on one of those and get kind of some live stats results that'll come up here as well. So that's a great part of our website here. There's also just the live video links as well, some history of the championship. So again, this is when we're in the championship, this is where we'll have some stories and you can follow along with what is happening. And then we also have the ncaa.org website, which you've seen a little bit of today already, and that is really our membership-focused website and more informational about everything. So, right here is our main page. We have some COVID-19 updates, and that really is a great resource for everybody to go to click on that website and see a lot of information related to some of the things that my colleagues have talked about today already are on there. There's information by division, so definitely would urge you guys to take a look at that. From a championship perspective, we're going to start with your division here at the top, and then we have a championship button here to click on. Again, that's the same for each division, depending on which division you want to see. And we'll scroll down here to tennis in the spring on the side here. And this is where all of our information lives. Again, each division, same thing, same process to get to that. We post more in our championship. We post the lineups there for the coaches to see the lineups during the tournament that they can have access to. We have some other forms and stuff where they actually submit their lineups, the lineup challenge form. We have our manuals on here and annual meeting reports for our committees, that kind of update. So very informational on here. I know we get kind of beat up for all the different manuals we have. So our pre-championship manual, which is the one I'd probably point our listeners to today, that has the most information about the championship. Again, this exists for each of our divisions. And this is really what kind of details a lot of the information related to our championships in terms of, the formats that I talked about, where they're going to be, the dates that they take place. It lists all of our committee members, all the important dates for the championship. Our selection criteria is in here, which is the information on how we determine the teams that qualify for the championship. So all this information is in here. I always feel like people don't really know where it is. It's here, it's in here, it exists, I promise. We update this every year, and it's posted before the championship begins. So it's a wealth of information, a lot of good details in here. So definitely urge everyone, if they want to find out more about our tennis championships, specifically to go to this website, look at those manuals. There's other manuals here that are specific to our hosts that gives them information on how we want them to run our championships and information they need to have it. And then our final site kind of participant manual, which is geared for our teams that make it to the final site, so that they have kind of site specific information and know all the details that they need to have when they get on site. So that kind of gives you some of the details of our championships, and hopefully that helps.
This is great. Thank you, John. That's awesome. We're just gonna, awesome job. Great. That kind of concludes the webinar. I was just looking at this question, somewhat of a emotional question. When will the NCAA limit the number of foreign student athletes on tennis teams? And I don't know if anybody would care to answer that. I'm guessing it's something that would happen through the legislative process if the NCAA ever felt that the membership felt that that was an important thing to try to legislate. When I worked at the USTA in college tennis, that was a question that would come into my inbox a lot. The fact of the matter is that there's so many private schools that you couldn't legislate how to restrict their student body anyway. So, and you wouldn't necessarily restrict tennis and not other sports, or tennis and not the engineering program. I think it's across the board. If you were to limit the number of student athletes from outside the country, I mean, to me, it's probably more of an antitrust lawsuit than the NCAA deciding that they're going to, limit the number of scholarships or the number of student athletes from outside the U.S. on a roster. And I don't know if any of our panelists kind of have a thought on that subject matter that you'd like to weigh in on. But I would probably direct, let me see the name of the person who sent it. It's an anonymous person, but I think Tim Russell has really framed an answer to that question, very, very well. That, we really embrace, I don't want to speak for Tim, but I've seen his writing on it in a number of different spaces on a white paper that he wrote years ago. And I don't know if any of you feel differently or have kind of an NCAA statement about something like that. Feel free to chime in.
I'll start. I think just briefly, I think you've hit on some points, but I think too, the NCAA, one of our defining pillars is inclusion, and I just think that would not coincide with our mission and thought process within college athletics. So that just one thought of mine.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Any closing comments from this great group? I really, before the webinar started, I asked the panelists if they knew each other, and the NCAA is such a big organization, and I'm really delighted to bring the three of you together. Maybe when you run into each other outside the Starbucks across the street from the NCAA, you'll recognize each other.
That's right.
Thank you so much. You guys were outstanding, and really appreciate everybody chiming in. The questions from Lisa, Glenn, thank you, Shreyas, and all the viewers out there. If you'd like to get a link to this, Tara will post in the days ahead. And special thanks to Tara for kind of keeping us on the straight and narrow. And wish everybody a great weekend, safe days ahead, and thank you, everybody.